I was bending down to tie my shoelaces when I saw a pair of trembling hands sticking out from a torn blanket by the roadside. A familiar wedding ring caught the dull glow of the streetlight. I froze. That ring! I had bought it for my daughter 10 years ago. I stepped closer, my heart pounding. A woman was curled up, her face lowered, her hair matted from cold and dust. When she lifted her head, I felt something inside my chest shatter. Dad, Emily, my daughter, the one who once had a home, a marriage, a life that was supposed to be steady. And in that instant, I understood that someone had destroyed her, and that person would never forget what I was about to do. If you're still here, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Every comment helps this story reach more hearts. And if it moved you, give it a like so others can find it too. That night was colder than the weather forecast had said. Not the sharp, cutting cold of falling snow, but the kind that seeped into your bones, making my aging knees ache with every step. I had just gotten off the late bus, the last one of the day, the kind with only a few exhausted faces left on board, just like mine. I was almost 70, and even though I kept telling myself I was still healthy, my body kept reminding me that time was no longer on my side. My back throbbed dully. My hands trembled slightly from fatigue. All I wanted was to get back to my small house, make a hot cup of coffee, sit down in the old armchair by the window, and sleep deeply. The walk from the bus stop to my house took less than 10 minutes. I had walked that route thousands of times over more than 20 years, so familiar I could have done it with my eyes closed. The dim yellow streetlights, the empty parking lot, the sparse sound of cars passing on the distant avenue. I wasn't expecting anything unusual, and maybe that was why the shock was so cruel. At first, I thought I was just seeing another homeless person, like so many others who huddled under bridges on cold nights. This city had no shortage of scenes like that, especially after the pandemic, after layoffs, after quiet divorces no one talked about. I had gotten used to lowering my head and walking past, not out of indifference but helplessness. What more could an old man like me do, besides occasionally leaving behind a few spare coins? But then I saw the ring. The streetlight reflected off it, faintly but clearly enough for me to recognize it instantly. A plain gold band, with a date and 2 small initials engraved on the inside. I remembered that day in the jewelry store so clearly, my hands shaking with nervous excitement as I chose that ring for Emily. 10 years ago, I had slipped it onto her finger at her wedding, telling myself that from then on, my daughter had another man to protect her. I stopped dead in my tracks. My heart was pounding so hard my ears rang. I stepped closer, one slow step at a time, as if I were afraid that moving too fast would make the scene disappear, or worse, make it so real I couldn't bear it. The woman was curled up in a thin, ragged blanket, her shoulders shuddering. Her clothes were dirty and worn, their original color impossible to tell. Her long black hair, once carefully groomed, was now clumped together, falling messily over half her face. When she lifted her head, everything inside me collapsed. Those eyes, exhausted, sunken from lack of sleep and hunger, but unmistakable. The eyes I had seen since the day she was born, from the mornings she ran around the backyard, from the nights she cried because she was afraid of thunder. There was no mistaking them. Dad. Just one word, weak and broken, but enough to tear through the calm shell I had built over the years. I dropped to my knees in front of her, ignoring the sharp pain as they hit the freezing concrete. In that moment, I was no longer a man nearing 70. I was just a father, standing before the daughter I had failed to protect. Emily was so thin it terrified me. When I reached out and gently touched her shoulder, I could feel bone beneath the thin fabric. Her skin was cold, so cold it made me shiver. Her lips were cracked and pale. One sneaker looked like it had been picked up somewhere, too big for her foot. The other was torn open, the sole nearly falling off. My throat tightened. I didn't know what to say, what to ask first. All the questions, why, how, since when, crashed over me at once, but not a single one came out. I just held her. It was the only instinct I had left. I pulled Emily against my chest, wrapping my arms around her, shielding her from the cold wind and the curious glances of passing cars. She stiffened for a second, then broke down. Emily cried. Not loudly, just muffled, shaking sobs, as if she had been holding it in for far too long. "Dad, I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice heavy with shame. I shook my head, even though I knew she couldn't see it. Shame was not something Emily should have been carrying, but I knew how small and humiliated she felt in that moment. A woman who had once had a family, a job, who had smiled in the photos I still kept on the mantel, now lying under a bridge, curled up like someone invisible. I took off my coat and wrapped it around her. It wasn't very thick, but at least it carried my familiar scent. Old wood and coffee, the smell of a place called home. I didn't ask why she was there. I didn't ask how long she had been there. Not now. Those questions could wait. The only thing that mattered was getting her out of that place. "Let's go home," I said, my voice rough. "Dad will take you home." Emily looked up at me, panic flashing across her eyes. She shook her head slightly, as if afraid of disappointing me even more. But I didn't give her the chance to refuse. I helped her to her feet. She trembled, leaning almost all her weight on me just to stay upright. That was when I realized something that made my heart clench. She was so much lighter than the last time I had held her, 2 years ago. 2 years. I hadn't seen her in 2 years. Just a few brief phone calls, most of them answered by Lucas instead, saying Emily was busy, that she was tired, that everything was fine. I had believed him. I had chosen to believe him, because I wanted to believe my daughter was happy in her own life. We walked slowly along the sidewalk, each step heavy. I stayed on the outside, shielding her from the wind. Every time Emily stumbled even slightly, my heart skipped. I didn't know how long it had been since she'd eaten a proper meal, how many nights she had slept like this. The thought made anger begin to boil inside me, but I forced it down. I didn't want her to see me lose control. When we were only a few blocks from my house, Emily suddenly squeezed my hand. She lowered her head, her voice breaking. He took everything, Dad." Just one short, halting sentence, but I understood immediately. I didn't need to ask who he was. In Emily's life, there was only one man close enough to have taken everything from her. Lucas. My son-in-law. The man I had never truly trusted, even though I tried to show respect for my daughter's happiness. I didn't answer right away. I tightened my grip on her hand, a silent promise. In my chest, anger spread, not exploding, not loud, but quiet and dense, like a fire burning deep beneath the ashes. I knew I wouldn't do anything rash tonight, but I also knew that from this moment on, I would never again be the man who stayed silent and simply trusted. Some lines once crossed leave no way back. When the door of my house closed behind us, I realized my hands were shaking. Not from the cold anymore, but because everything had finally become too real. I turned on the living room light, the familiar warm glow filling the space, illuminating Emily's pale face. She squinted slightly, as if it had been far too long since she had stood in a room bright and quiet enough to let her guard down. "Sit down," I said softly, almost afraid of breaking the fragile calm. Emily nodded and sat on the edge of the sofa. When she let herself sink down, I heard a very faint sigh, as if her body had finally been allowed to relax for the first time in days, or weeks. I hurried into the kitchen. My small kitchen looked the same as always, tidy, worn, unchanged. The kettle sat on the stove, a few packets of soup in the cabinet, things I always kept, even though I rarely cooked for anyone but myself. I chose the simplest chicken soup, not because it was special, but because it was what I used to make for Emily whenever she was sick as a child. Back then, she would curl her legs up on the chair, both hands wrapped around a bowl bigger than her hands, blowing on it before eating, then looking up at me with a smile as if I had done something extraordinary. The memory hit me suddenly, tightening my chest. The water boiled. I poured the soup into the pot, stirring slowly. The smell of chicken and vegetables spread through the room, warm enough to make my eyes sting. I heard Emily shift behind me, but didn't turn around. I didn't want her to see my face like this. When I brought the bowl out, Emily had curled up on the sofa. I set it on the table, pulled a thick blanket from the closet, and draped it over her shoulders. She looked at the soup, her eyes briefly lighting up, then dropping again, as if she were afraid she didn't deserve that kind of care. "Eat a little," I said, trying to keep my voice as normal as possible. Emily picked up the spoon, her hand trembling slightly. She took a small bite, then another, but after just a few spoonfuls, her eyelids began to droop. I watched her body slowly tilt to the side, the spoon slipping from her fingers and falling softly into the bowl. "Emily?" I called. No answer. She was already asleep, out cold, so fast it stunned me. I quickly moved the bowl aside, gently adjusted her position, and pulled the blanket up higher. Her breathing evened out, slow and light, too light. I sat down in the chair across from her and didn't take my eyes off her. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat there in the living room, under the yellow lamp, watching my daughter sleep as if I were afraid that if I looked away for even a second, she would disappear again. I realized how long it had been since I last watched Emily sleep. The last time was probably before her wedding, when she stayed over at my house, excited and anxious about the big day ahead. 2 years. I had lost my daughter for 2 years, not because she didn't exist, but because I hadn't seen. I had believed that silence was fine, that distance was normal when children grow up. I had let unanswered calls become routine. At first, I called back, sent messages to check in, but gradually the person who always answered was Lucas. "Emily's busy, Dad." "She's tired. Call back later." "The doctor says Emily needs more rest." Lucas spoke for her smoothly, calmly, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. And I accepted it. I convinced myself my son-in-law was protecting his wife, that I shouldn't interfere too much. Every time my intuition stirred, I pushed it aside. I was afraid of becoming an overbearing father, afraid of making my daughter's marriage harder. Looking back now, that fear feels like cowardice. I looked at Emily's gaunt face, the faint shadows under her eyes, her skin pale from lack of sleep and food. She looked far older than her years, as if life had forced her to grow up in the cruelest way. I wondered how many nights in those 2 years she had lain like this, but without a blanket, without light, without anyone watching over her. A heavy guilt pressed down on my chest. I was her father. Before her mother died, I had promised I would always keep an eye on our daughter. And yet, I had let that promise slip away, little by little, because I chose to believe comforting words over the uneasy feeling in my gut. Anger rose again, but it was no longer the blind rage of the moment I saw Emily under the bridge. It slowed, thickened, became sharper and more focused. I began connecting the dots in my mind. A man doesn't accidentally take everything from his wife without leaving traces. A woman doesn't disappear from her family for 2 years just because she's busy or tired. This couldn't be simple abandonment. I stood up and went into the kitchen, poured myself a cup of coffee. The clock on the wall showed almost 3 a.m. Outside, the city was silent, with only the occasional distant car passing by. I sat at the table, holding the cup but not drinking, watching the thin steam rise and fade into the air. In my mind, a quiet decision took shape. Tomorrow morning, I would hear the whole truth. not fragments, not softened versions. I needed to know everything, when it started, how it happened, and why. I owed Emily that. I owed myself that. And for the first time in my life, I thought about confrontation. Not the kind of confrontation of a younger man, fists clenched and voice raised in anger, but the confrontation of someone who has lived long enough to know that begging never brings justice. I would not beg Lucas to explain. I would not ask for his mercy. I would look straight at the truth, no matter how ugly it was, and I would make him face it. I went back into the living room and sat closer to Emily. I pulled the blanket up to her neck so gently I was afraid of waking her. In her sleep, she frowned slightly, as if dreaming of something unsettling. I reached out, laid my hand softly on her hair, stroking it the way I used to when she was afraid. "Sleep," I whispered. "Dad's here now." That night I stayed awake until nearly morning. Not because I wasn't tired, but because I wouldn't allow myself to sleep. There are moments in life when, if you fall asleep, you lose something important. And I knew this was one of them. Morning came very slowly, as if the whole house were holding its breath, not wanting to wake the pain waiting to be spoken. The early light slipped through the gap in the curtains, laying a thin stripe across the old wooden floor. I had already made coffee, but the cup in front of me had gone untouched. I heard very soft footsteps in the hallway, slow and cautious, as if the person stepping out were afraid of disturbing the house itself. Emily stood in the doorway of the living room, her arms wrapped around herself. She had washed her face and changed into some clothes I'd taken from my old closet for her. They hung loose on her frame, but they were clean, decent. Only her eyes still looked exhausted, deep and heavy, as if holding an entire sleepless night. "Dad," Emily spoke first, her voice soft but clearer than the night before. I need to talk to you." I nodded without speaking. I pulled out a chair for her and waited for her to sit. In that moment, I realized my hands were clenched. Not because I was afraid of what I was about to hear, but because I already suspected it. Still, guessing was different from hearing it. Hearing it in my daughter's trembling voice was something else entirely. Emily sat down, lowered her head. She was silent for a long time. I didn't rush her. I understood that some stories, once told, force you to face everything you've tried to forget. "Lucas," she began, then stopped. Her throat moved slightly. "He sold the house, Dad." The words dropped into the room like a heavy object. I stayed still, didn't interrupt. I needed to hear it all, even if each word hurt. "The house was in both our names," Emily continued, her voice steadier now, as if she had told this story to herself many times already. "I didn't know anything. No paperwork, no signatures, not a word beforehand." She took a deep breath, then looked up at me. There were no tears in her eyes, just something dry and exhausted, too tired to cry. I found out when they came knocking. I frowned. "They?" "The new owners," Emily said. "A couple. They stood at the door, polite but firm. They said they had just bought the house, that everything was finalized. They asked when I would be moving out." I felt a surge of heat run up my spine. I kept my voice steady. "Where was Lucas then?" Emily gave a faint, joyless laugh. "He wasn't there. He had already moved out." She told me how, in that moment, her mind went blank. She was standing in the house she had cleaned corner by corner, where she had hung the curtains, chosen the bedroom paint, and yet she felt like an intruder. The woman handed Emily a copy of the sales contract. Lucas's name was there, clear and cold, like a declaration that everything had been planned long ago. "I called him," Emily went on. "No answer. I texted him. No reply. Not until that evening did he finally call back, completely calm. He said everything was already done, that the house had to be sold to prepare for the future." I clenched my teeth. Whose future? Emily didn't answer right away. She looked down at the table at an old scratch I'd meant to fix years ago, but never did. His, she said, and the other woman's. The room seemed to shrink. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Lucas had been living with his mistress before all this, not after selling the house, not because the marriage had already fallen apart and then he found someone else, but before. While Emily was still there, still trying to hold together a marriage that was already hollow. He told me that, Emily hesitated, then continued, her voice dropping, that I didn't need to know too much, that he had everything handled, that I should trust him. Trust. A short word, abused until it was completely warped. Emily said that after that day the joint account was frozen, the bank cards stopped working. The money she had always thought was hers, theirs as a couple, suddenly vanished. Lucas moved it all into his personal account, leaving Emily with literally nothing. I had nothing, Dad, Emily said, her voice trembling now. No money, no house, not even my important documents. When I asked, he said it was temporary, that I should just stay calm and everything would be fine. I clenched my hands. Temporary. Such an easy word to say when you're sitting in another apartment, when you're sleeping in the same bed as someone else. Emily said that when she started asking more questions, Lucas changed. His voice was no longer gentle. He began raising his voice, started blaming her. He said Emily was weak, unreasonable, that she didn't know how to think about the family. And then, like a final blow, he brought me into it. He said that if I told you, Emily looked at me, a flicker of an old, ingrained fear in her eyes, you wouldn't be able to handle it, that you were old, that you had a weak heart, that the truth would kill you. He said I was selfish if I dragged you into this. I closed my eyes for a moment, not because my heart was weak, but because it hurt. Lucas had used my daughter's love for me to silence her. That wasn't just lying. That was manipulation. Emily nodded as if she could read my thoughts. I believed him, she said. I thought, maybe you really would be devastated. Maybe I should handle it myself. But she had never been allowed to handle it herself. Lucas hadn't just taken her money and her house. He had cut Emily off from anyone who could help her. He spoke badly about her to mutual friends, to his side of the family. He said Emily wasn't stable, that she needed space, that people shouldn't contact her too much. And one by one, slowly, people disappeared from my daughter's life. Emily stayed at a friend's place for a few nights. Then she felt like a burden. Then she moved to cheap motels, the kind you pay for by the night, with damp smells and harsh white lights. She spoke very quietly about nights lying awake, listening to cars on the highway, clutching her bag because she was afraid of losing the few things she had left. I thought it would only be a few days, Emily said, but then the money ran out. She didn't ask anyone for help. She didn't call me. She didn't call any relatives. Shame won. And then, one night, when she no longer had enough money to pay for the motel, Emily went out onto the street, under the bridge, where I found her. I sat there listening, each detail like a slow knife. No need to be sharp, just deep enough. When Emily finished, the room fell silent. Not an empty silence, but the heavy silence of things that had finally been named. I looked at my daughter, and in that moment, everything became clear. This wasn't a bad breakup. It wasn't simply a failed marriage. This was abuse. Financial abuse, when one person controls the money to strip the other of choices. Psychological abuse, when someone uses fear and love to silence, isolate, and break the other person. I stood up and walked a few steps across the living room, then stopped. I didn't shout. I didn't slam the table. The anger inside me didn't need loud displays anymore. It had become cold and precise. "Emily," I said, turning back to her, "you did nothing wrong." She lowered her head, her lips trembling. I stepped closer and placed my hand on her shoulder. This time, I wasn't shielding her like the night before. I rested my hand there with a different kind of steadiness. "And I won't let this end here." Emily looked up, a trace of fear in her eyes. Maybe she was worried I would do something impulsive, but I knew exactly what I was thinking. For the first time, I didn't think about calling Lucas to demand explanations. I didn't think about asking for his mercy or his pity. I thought about the truth, and I knew that truth would need to be brought into the light, step by step. I stood there for a long time, my hand still on Emily's shoulder, feeling the slight tremor in her body with each breath. The house was so quiet I could hear the wall clock ticking 1 second at a time. In that silence, I understood that there are things which, if not spoken now, a father and daughter might carry for the rest of their lives. "You were never a burden," I said slowly, weighing every word. "Not to me, never." Emily looked up at me. Her eyes were red, but no longer empty the way they had been while she was telling her story. In that look, I saw something shifting, as if she were trying to believe my words, even though shame had taken root too deeply. "I know you say that," Emily whispered, "but I still feel humiliated. I let things go this far. I let him do this to me." I shook my head. "You're not crying because you're weak. You're crying because you were treated badly for a very long time and kept enduring it. That isn't weakness. That's being human." Emily lowered her head, her hands clasped together. Tears fell onto the backs of her hands, silent, soundless. I didn't rush to wipe them away. I let her cry. Some tears need to fall so a person can stand upright again. When the crying eased, Emily took a deep breath, as if gathering all her courage. "Do you want to know where he's living?" she asked. I nodded. "Yes." She hesitated for a moment, then gave me the address. An apartment complex on the north side of the city, a place I'd heard mentioned but had never been to. Emily said Lucas moved there not long after selling the house. And Vanessa, the other woman, had been living there with him since before Emily was thrown out of her own home. "Do you know why he sold the house so quickly?" Emily asked, her voice strangely calm. I didn't answer. I had already guessed part of it. "Because they needed the money," she went on. "Vanessa wanted a different life. A new apartment, new furniture, everything new. He said it was a fresh start, that the past should be left behind." The past. Hearing that word made me feel cold. To Lucas, the past was my daughter, 10 years of marriage, the house bought with the effort of 2 people. To him, leaving it behind meant wiping away responsibility. I turned away and walked a few steps across the living room. The anger inside me no longer boiled like the night before. It settled, becoming a heavy, sharp mass. I began to see everything in a different light, not the light of pain, but of clarity. "I'm not going to hit him," I said, almost to myself. "I'm not going there to yell or threaten." Emily looked up, a little surprised. Maybe she had been afraid I would do something reckless. I turned back to her, keeping my voice calm. "Violence only makes things worse," I continued, "and it doesn't give back what you've lost." I sat down across from Emily. For the first time since she started talking, I looked straight into her eyes and spoke with more firmness. "Justice isn't about hurting him the way he hurt you. Justice is letting him collapse under the weight of what he's done." Emily stayed quiet. I could tell she was listening, not just with her ears, but with her fear and her hope. I knew she was used to being controlled, used to being led by other people's decisions. I didn't want to become another person who imposed choices on her. "But to do that," I said, "I need your help." Emily tilted her head slightly. "How can I help you?" "By telling me everything," I answered. Not just the big things, even the details you think don't matter. The arguments, the words he used, the small changes you brushed aside. She took a deep breath. I could see the hesitation in her eyes. To tell it again meant reliving it. Facing moments when she had blamed herself for not being good enough, not strong enough. "I'm not sure I remember everything," Emily said softly. "That's okay," I replied. "We have time. I'm not in a rush, but I need the truth, all of it." Emily nodded very slowly. Then she began to recount the small, scattered pieces. The times Lucas complained about money even though they weren't struggling. The times he suggested she quit her job because it was unnecessary, because he could handle it. The evenings he came home late with excuses about meetings, the messages he deleted in front of her, saying they were just work-related. I listened without interrupting. Each detail was a piece of a puzzle, and little by little the picture became clearer. Not an impulsive decision, but a long, calculated process. Step by step, Lucas had controlled the money, made Emily dependent, and isolated her from the outside world. "There was a time," Emily said, her voice growing quieter, "when I said I wanted to visit you. He said it wasn't necessary, said you were old, that traveling was tiring for you, that I shouldn't bother you." I closed my eyes for a moment. I remembered that time. I remembered laughing and saying it was fine, that I understood. I hadn't understood. "I believed him," Emily went on. "I thought he was just looking out for you." "No," I said gently but firmly. "He was looking out for himself." Emily didn't argue. Maybe for the first time, she allowed herself to see things differently. I noticed a small change in the way she sat, her back a little straighter, her gaze less evasive. When the story paused, the room fell quiet again. But this time, it wasn't a heavy silence. It felt more like the stillness before moving forward. I stood up and went to the window. Outside, the city was fully awake now. Traffic noise had grown thicker, the sunlight brighter. A new day was unfolding, even though the night before had felt like a lifetime to me. "From today on," I said without turning around, "things will be different." Emily stood up behind me. I could feel her presence, closer, steadier. "I won't promise it will be easy," I continued, "and I won't promise you won't hurt anymore. But I promise one thing." I turned back and looked straight into my daughter's eyes. "I won't let you face this alone, and I won't let Lucas think he can disappear after what he's done." Emily nodded, a very slight nod, but enough for me to know she understood. And in that moment, the vow of an old father didn't need to be spoken loudly. It had already been set down, solid and unshakable, like a foundation no one could easily destroy. Emily stood still for a moment after my vow, as if weighing something deeply. Her eyes were no longer as lost as before, but they still carried a familiar hesitation, the hesitation of someone who had lived in fear for too long. Then she turned and walked slowly toward the small backpack in the corner of the living room. It was old, silver gray, the zipper worn, smooth, looking like it had traveled many roads no one knew about. Emily crouched down and unzipped it. Her hands trembled slightly, not from cold, but from what she was about to take out. I didn't rush her. I stood still and waited, feeling the moment shift from emotion to action. She pulled out a brown envelope, the kind made of thick paper used for documents. It was old, the edges frayed, the corners creased from being folded many times. There was no writing on it, no name, no identifying mark. Just an ordinary envelope, if not for the way Emily held it. "I've kept this for almost 2 years, Emily said, her voice quiet but steady. "I don't know why I didn't throw it away. Maybe part of me knew that one day you would need it." I reached out and took it. The envelope was light, but when I touched it, it felt much heavier than its actual weight. I didn't open it right away. I looked at Emily first, wanting to be sure she was ready. "What's inside?" I asked, even though I already suspected. "Things Lucas didn't know I kept," Emily replied. "Emails, copies of contracts, and some messages I printed before he had a chance to delete them." I took a deep breath and opened the envelope. The papers inside weren't neatly arranged. Some were folded in half, some slightly crumpled, some yellowed with time. But as I began turning each page, everything became clearer than any spoken explanation ever could. Email exchanges with the bank, transfer notices, a copy of the house sale contract, bearing only Lucas's signature. Dates, amounts, everything was there. I paused longer on one sheet of paper, a black and white printed email sent from an address I didn't need to read to know it was Vanessa's. "Sell it," the line read coldly. "We need the money to close on the new apartment. Don't hesitate." There was no concern, no doubt, just an order. I looked up at Emily. She turned her face away, as if she couldn't bear to see those words again. "When did you read it for the first time?" I asked. "After I was kicked out of the house," Emily answered. "I went back to get a few things. I knew he had already moved out. I found that printout in the desk drawer. Maybe he forgot to throw it away." I continued reviewing the other documents. Bank statements showed large sums transferred in a short period of time into accounts Emily had never known about. Every transaction was fast, clean, as if the person behind them had prepared everything well in advance. I could clearly see a familiar pattern, not an impulsive act, but a plan. "He told me the money was for work," Emily said evenly, as if talking about someone else's life. "That investing would benefit both of us. I believed him." I set the stack of papers down on the table. In my mind, the pieces were locking into place. Selling the house, freezing the accounts, rapid transfers, isolating Emily from her family. Everything pointed to a single goal, taking everything she had, then leaving without responsibility. "This isn't a private matter between husband and wife," I said slowly. "This is fraud, and not the accidental kind." Emily looked up. In her eyes, I saw a flicker of something that felt like fear, but also like relief. Maybe, for the first time, she was hearing what she had been through called by its proper name. "I think he planned this from very early on," I went on. "Step by step, making you dependent, making you believe you had no other choice." Emily stayed quiet. She didn't argue, maybe because she was starting to realize it herself. I gathered the papers and slid them neatly back into the envelope. In my hands now, that envelope was no longer just a container for painful memories. It had become something else, a tool, evidence. "You did the right thing keeping these," I said. "Absolutely the right thing." Emily pressed her lips together. "I used to think I was a coward for not using them." "No," I said immediately. "You were surviving. And sometimes surviving is the bravest thing there is." I sat down and placed the envelope on the table in front of me. In my mind, a name came into sharp focus. Daniel Moore, an old friend, a lawyer I had worked with many years ago, back when I was still working full-time. We hadn't seen each other in a long while, but I knew Daniel. He wasn't the type to talk much, but once he saw something was wrong, he would see it through to the end. "Tonight I'm going to call Daniel," I said. "My old lawyer." Emily looked surprised. "Dad, are you sure?" I nodded. "I'm sure." I took out my phone and scrolled through my old contacts. Daniel Moore's name was still there, along with a number I hadn't dialed in years. I paused for a second, then pressed call. The phone rang 3 times before someone picked up. "Harold?" Daniel's voice came through, deep and familiar. "It's been a long time." "It has," I said. "I need your help." There were no unnecessary questions. Daniel was silent for a brief moment, then said, "What's going on?" "It involves my daughter," I said. and a house sale that wasn't above board. I heard Daniel take a deep breath on the other end. "Can you bring the documents here?" "I already have them," I replied. "I'll come by." Oh, when I hung up, I looked again at the envelope on the table. For the first time since I found Emily under that bridge, I no longer felt powerless. The anger was still there. The pain was still there. But beneath it all, something else had emerged: clarity. The plan wasn't complete yet. I didn't know how far this would go or how Lucas would react. But I knew one thing. The road ahead was no longer shapeless. It had taken form. And that worn envelope Emily had kept for 2 years was the first stone laid on that path. Emily sat across from me, quietly watching. I saw a very small but very real change in her eyes. Not unrealistic hope, but the sense that this time she wouldn't have to face it alone. And for me, that was enough to begin. I left the house after Emily had fallen asleep. She drifted off quickly after a light meal, her exhausted body finally giving in. I stood in the doorway of her room for a long time, watching her. Her breathing was steadier, her brow no longer furrowed the way it had been when she was awake. I closed the door very gently, as if even the slightest sound might pull her back into nights without shelter. Outside, the afternoon was already fading. I put on my coat, took the brown envelope with me, and headed to the car. I didn't tell Emily where I was going. Not to hide it, but because I didn't want her to worry yet. There are some things an old man like me needs to check on himself before speaking out loud. Lucas's apartment complex was on the north side of the city, an area I rarely visited. Wide roads, neatly trimmed trees, long stretches of green lawn in front of tall buildings. The farther I drove from my old neighborhood with its low houses and cracked sidewalks, the more sharply I felt the contrast. This city had always known how to divide itself into 2 different worlds. I parked a short distance away from the complex, not because there was no space, but because I wanted to walk a bit. I needed time to observe, to breathe, to make sure I didn't walk in with a hot head. The entrance was tightly controlled. Shiny access cards, cameras mounted in obvious places. Everything projected safety, order, and innocence. I stopped in front of the gate and looked up at the stacked balconies. I don't know why, but the first image that came to mind was the night under the bridge, where I had found Emily. Cold concrete, flickering streetlights, a torn blanket. Those 2 images side by side, 2 faces of the same story, made my chest tighten. I didn't go straight in. I stood across the street, pretending to look at my phone while watching people come and go. Everyone looked calm. They carried shopping bags, talked on their phones, laughed together. No one knew that one apartment in that building had been built on taking everything from another woman. After a while, I saw a middle-aged woman walking her dog past me. The small white dog was well-groomed. She stopped nearby to let the dog settle. I nodded politely, out of habit. "Are you here too?" she asked casually. "I'm visiting someone I know," I replied, leaving it at that. She nodded, then suddenly looked at me more closely, as if trying to place me. Are you Emily's father?" My heart skipped slightly. "Yes," I answered slowly. "How do you know?" The woman sighed, her expression carrying a mix of hesitation and regret. "I met her, a while back, when she was still living here." I kept my voice steady. "Under what circumstances did you meet her?" "Not good ones," she said, tugging gently on the dog's leash. "That man, Lucas, he used to raise his voice a lot. Once I saw him yelling at her right out in the hallway. She was crying, and he walked away like nothing had happened." I didn't say anything. I let her continue. "Another time," she added more quietly, "I saw her sitting alone in the lobby for a long time. She looked like she was waiting for someone. When I asked, she just gave me an awkward smile. I thanked her. She nodded and walked on, the dog trotting beside her. That brief exchange was enough to confirm what I already knew in my gut. Emily had been humiliated here, right in a place that looked civilized and respectable. I turned back toward the building. By then, the afternoon light had softened, reflecting off the glass balconies. And that was when I saw them. Lucas was standing on an upper floor balcony, leaning against the railing. Beside him was Vanessa. She was wearing a loose dress, one hand resting on her stomach, smiling as Lucas said something. In that moment, I knew. Vanessa was pregnant. No one had to tell me. The way she held her belly, the way Lucas looked down at it with pride, it was unmistakable. They were laughing. A light, easy laugh, as if life had just begun, as if there were no past they needed to take responsibility for. I stood there, frozen. In my mind, two images kept overlapping. Emily curled under the bridge, and Lucas standing high on that balcony, sunlight on his face. If there was ever a moment that made the injustice of this world painfully clear, it was that one. My hand clenched. I knew I could walk through the gate, demand to see Lucas, say everything boiling in my chest. But I didn't. I stayed where I was. I took a long, deep breath. Not now. I had learned something over many long years of living. Rushing brings quick satisfaction, but justice takes time. If I showed myself now, Lucas would be on guard. He would build walls, prepare lies, look for ways to evade responsibility. I couldn't allow that. I turned away from the complex and walked slowly back to my car. Each step felt heavy, but my mind was clear. What I had just seen didn't make me lose control. On the contrary, it made me more certain that luxurious life wasn't an innocent reward. It was built on enforced silence, drained bank accounts, and a woman pushed onto the streets. And foundations like that, no matter how solid they appear, eventually collapse. By the time I got into the car, it was starting to get dark. I didn't start the engine right away. I sat there for a moment, looking back at the building one last time. I didn't look for Lucas anymore. I looked at the other balconies, the other apartments, where there were probably stories I didn't know. Justice doesn't come by charging straight into the spotlight. It comes through quiet preparation, by gathering each piece of truth, by waiting for the right moment. I started the engine and drove home. I didn't turn on the radio. I needed the silence to think. In my mind, the brown envelope, the call with Daniel, and that balcony came together in a straight line. I hadn't confronted Lucas yet, but I had seen him in his new world. And I knew that to bring down a world like that, I would need more than outrage. I would need patience. I would need strategy. And I was ready for that. I returned to the apartment complex on another morning, when the sunlight was still low and the city hadn't yet grown noisy. This time, I didn't stand across the street and observe. I walked straight to the gate, calm enough to surprise even myself. In my coat pocket, the brown envelope lay still, thin but heavy like a reminder. I wasn't carrying anger, I was carrying preparation. The security guard looked at me and asked for a name. I said, Lucas Reed. He checked the list, looked up, and asked if I had an appointment. I shook my head. I'm his father-in-law, I said evenly. I just need a few minutes. Maybe it was my age or the way I stood, but he hesitated. After a brief pause, he made a call. I waited, hands folded in front of me, back straight, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. I could hear my own heartbeat, but it wasn't racing. It was steady, as if it had found its rhythm. The elevator doors opened on Lucas's floor. The hallway was clean, faintly smelling of disinfectant, white lights reflecting off the polished floor. I walked slowly, counting each step, and stopped in front of the apartment door, whose number I had seen from afar the day before. I raised my hand and knocked twice. Not rushed, not hard. The door opened. Lucas stood there wearing a plain t-shirt and dark pants. His expression flickered with surprise, then quickly shifted to irritation. He looked me up and down as if deciding whether I was worth his time. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice dry. "I'm here to talk," I said. "About Emily." He gave a short, dismissive laugh, one corner of his mouth curling the way Emily had described. "Whatever's between me and her has nothing to do with you." I nodded as if acknowledging a point. "It does," I said, "because she's my daughter." Lucas leaned against the door frame, crossing his arms. "You should leave," he said. "Emily ruined her own life. She's weak, clingy. I'm not responsible for supporting someone like that." Those words came out lightly, as if he were talking about a defective object. I heard every one of them. I let them pass through me, settle where I had prepared space for them. I didn't react. I didn't frown. I didn't clench my fists. I just looked at him. "Why are you so quiet?" Lucas went on, his irritation growing. "Planning to lecture me?" "I'm listening," I said, "to make sure I'm not misunderstanding." He smirked. "You understand perfectly. Emily is a burden. She can't manage money, can't adapt. I gave her enough chances." I took a slow, deep breath. In that moment, I remembered Emily under the bridge, her trembling hands, the old wedding ring. But I didn't let that memory control my words. I needed to stay calm, completely calm. "I didn't come here to argue," I said. "I came to say one thing." Lucas raised an eyebrow, challenging. "Go on." I opened the envelope slowly. I didn't shove the papers in his face. I just let the edge of the documents show, enough for him to recognize what I was holding. Lucas's expression changed instantly. His confidence pulled back slightly, like someone gently engaging a handbrake. "Do you know what's in here?" I asked. He laughed, but the sound wasn't solid. "Meaningless papers? You think you can scare me?" "Emails," I said. "Contracts, bank statements, messages demanding the house be sold quickly to close on a new apartment. Rapid transfers into accounts Emily never knew existed." Lucas straightened up. He uncrossed his arms. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know exactly what I'm talking about," I said. "And I know this wasn't an impulsive decision. It was a series of actions." He laughed louder, trying to regain the upper hand. "So what? What are you going to do? Tell the neighbors? Take me to court? You think anyone's going to believe an old man and an unstable woman?" I nodded, as if the question were reasonable. "I'm not here to do anything," I said. "Today." He paused. "Today?" "Yes," I replied. "Today is just a warning." He narrowed his eyes. "A warning?" "I want you to know that I've seen everything," I said slowly. "I've read it, and I'm talking to the right people." For a very brief second, doubt flickered across Lucas's face. Not much, but enough. He glanced inside the apartment, as if checking whether anyone was listening. I realized Vanessa wasn't there. That cost him a layer of protection. "You're threatening me," he said, lowering his voice. "I'm informing you," I replied. "There's a difference." He swallowed. I saw his throat move. "You don't have anything," he said, but the words lacked force. "I have time," I said. "And I have the truth." Lucas stepped back half a step. Just half a step. But for someone like him, it was significant. He was used to being in control. Being pushed out of that position, even slightly, made him uncomfortable. "You're crazy," he snapped. "I'll call security." "You can," I said. "But before you do, remember that I'm not here to stay." I sealed the envelope and slipped it back into my coat pocket. "I've said what needed to be said. From here on out, things won't happen the way you're used to anymore." I turned away. I didn't wait for him to say anything else. I walked down the bright white hallway, each step steady. I didn't look back. I didn't need to see his face right then. I had seen enough. In the elevator, I stood alone. The doors closed, the machinery humming softly. I looked at my faint reflection in the metal surface. An old man, gray hair, calm eyes. I realized my breathing was even. There was no trembling, no outburst. When the elevator doors opened in the lobby, I stepped out and walked straight outside. The morning sunlight touched my face, warm but not harsh. I took a deep breath, and for the first time since all of this began, felt a little lighter. I knew I had planted a seed, not a seed of hatred, but of fear. The fear of someone who believed everything had been buried, now realizing that someone was digging up each layer of dirt. On the drive home, I didn't dwell on what I had said. I thought about what I hadn't done. I hadn't let my emotions take control. I hadn't turned the meeting into a pointless argument. I had drawn a boundary. And I knew that from that moment on, Lucas would no longer sleep as peacefully as before. Daniel Moore came to my house on a morning with light rain. Not the kind of downpour that sends people scrambling for cover, but a steady drizzle, just enough to slow everything down. I like that kind of weather. It makes things feel subdued, suitable for decisions that can't be rushed. Daniel was in his early 60s, a few years younger than me. We'd known each other back when I worked in engineering for the city, and he was a lawyer specializing in complex civil cases. We hadn't seen each other in many years, but when I called and said just one sentence, "I need you to look into something involving my daughter," Daniel didn't ask anything else. He simply said, "I'll come." We sat at the old dining table where Emily used to do her homework as a child. I placed the brown envelope between us. Daniel opened it without haste. He read each page carefully, his eyes moving slowly but sharply behind his glasses. The room was so quiet, I could hear the rain tapping against the window. "How long have you had these?" Daniel asked. "Emily kept them," I said. "Almost 2 years." Daniel nodded. He reorganized the papers right there on the table. Contracts, printed emails, bank statements, text messages. Watching him work, I understood again why I'd called the right person. No unnecessary emotion, just focus and a clear system. "This isn't abandonment," Daniel said after a while. "This is deliberate financial abuse, and there are elements of fraud." I didn't look surprised. I had braced myself for that conclusion. Still, hearing it confirmed by someone else made my chest feel heavier. "What do we do next?" I asked. Daniel leaned back in his chair, thinking. "First, I'll review everything in detail. Every number, every signature. We need a clear timeline. Then?" He paused and looked straight at me. "We can move to request a freeze on assets related to the house sale." I took a deep breath. "A freeze?" "If there's enough preliminary evidence," Daniel said, "it would prevent Lucas from continuing to move assets, and it sends a very clear message." I was silent. I thought of the luxury apartment, the balcony where I'd seen Lucas and Vanessa laughing. I thought of Emily sleeping in the next room, for the first time in months not worrying about where she would be tomorrow. "Do it," I said. The days that followed passed slowly but densely. Daniel worked almost non-stop. I heard him making calls, sending emails, requesting additional information from banks and notary offices. I didn't ask about every step. I trusted him. My role now wasn't to interfere, but to keep Emily steady so she wouldn't be pulled back into fear. One afternoon, Daniel asked me to come by his office. He placed a thick file on his desk. "We have enough," he said, "at least enough to begin." I carried that file with me when I left, feeling it weigh more than it actually did. Not because of the paper, but because of what it represented. I didn't go home right away. I drove straight to Lucas's apartment complex. This time, I didn't go inside. I went down to the underground parking garage. I already knew which car was his. Daniel had confirmed it for me. A black sedan, spotless, parked neatly, as if its owner's life were just as orderly. I stood in front of the car for a moment. No one else was around. The fluorescent lights overhead cast a cold, indifferent glow. I took a copy of the filed complaint from my briefcase, stamped by the court. I didn't slap it on the windshield like a provocation. I placed it carefully under the wiper, straight enough that it couldn't be mistaken for an accident. I stepped back and looked at the paper lying there. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt order, as if a gear had finally clicked into place. I left the garage and drove home. I hadn't even turned off the engine when my phone vibrated. Lucas's name appeared on the screen. I looked at it for a few seconds before answering. "What the hell are you doing?" His voice burst out, urgent, stripped of its usual arrogance. "What is that paper? You can't do this." I didn't respond right away. I let him keep talking, let his panic expose itself. "You're ruining my life," Lucas almost shouted. "I have a new family. I'm about to have a child." Finally, I spoke. My voice was low and even. "Where was Emily when you were building that new life?" He fell silent. I could hear his heavy breathing through the phone. "What do you want?" Lucas asked, his voice smaller now. I asked only one question. "Do you remember the day you signed the papers to sell that house?" There was a long pause. Then Lucas said, his voice cracking, "You don't understand. It was more complicated than you think." "I understand enough," I replied, "and from now on, things will be understood in the right place." I hung up. No goodbye, no threats. I set the phone down on the kitchen table, where the yellow light reflected off the worn wood. I stood there for a moment, my hand resting on the back of a chair. That evening, Daniel texted me. "The request to review the asset freeze has been accepted. Not a final decision yet, but enough to apply pressure." I read the message twice, not to be sure I'd read it correctly, but to feel it. Pressure. Yes. The very thing Lucas had been used to applying to others was now turning back on him. Emily came out of her room, her hair still damp. "Are you okay, Dad?" she asked. I nodded. "I'm okay." She didn't ask anything else. Maybe Emily sensed the shift in the air. Not tension, but something moving. Slowly, steadily. That night I slept more deeply than I had in a long time. Not because everything was over. It was far from it. But because for the first time, I knew the balance of power was no longer in the hands of someone used to manipulating others. The law had begun to speak. And once it does, it isn't easily silenced. I met Vanessa one late evening when the city had lowered its voice and apartment windows glowed like sealed boxes carrying each family's secrets. I didn't go to argue, and I didn't go to lecture. I went because I knew that for a truth to stand, it has to be seen from multiple sides, including the side of someone who had believed the wrong person. I stood in front of the building where Vanessa lived, smaller than Lucas's complex but still polished enough to make people believe everything inside was safe. The security guard looked at me suspiciously. I gave Vanessa's name and said I was an old acquaintance of Lucas with some documents to return. Maybe my calm tone or my age made people less guarded. Eventually, the door opened. She appeared in the doorway, one hand resting on her belly in the instinctive way of an expectant mother. Vanessa looked thinner than she had from afar on the balcony. Her makeup was light, but her eyes showed clear exhaustion. She looked at me, hesitant. "You are?" she asked. "I'm Emily's father," I said. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I just want to talk." She froze. I saw her defenses rise instantly. "Lucas said you would come," she said cautiously. "He said you were very angry." "I'm not angry," I replied. "I'm just tired of lies." She hesitated, then opened the door wider. "Come in," she said, "but I don't have much time." The apartment was tidy with the faint scent of chamomile tea. Vanessa motioned for me to sit on the sofa. She sat across from me, hands clasped together. I could tell immediately that she trusted Lucas, the way someone trusts when they've placed their entire future in a promise. Lucas said Emily left him, Vanessa began, as if she wanted to get ahead of it. He said she was unstable, imagined things, caused problems. I believed him. I nodded. I know. She looked at me, surprised. You're not blaming me? I didn't come to blame, I said. I came to show you a few things. I opened my bag and placed the stack of papers on the low table between us. I didn't push them toward her, I just set them there. Vanessa looked at the documents as if they were something unfamiliar. What are those? She asked. What Lucas never told you, I replied. She hesitated for a long time before touching them. When she flipped the first page, I saw her lips press together. The emails were there. Lines demanding the house be sold quickly, pressure about a down payment for the new apartment. I didn't say anything. I let the documents speak for themselves. Vanessa read slowly at first, then faster. With each page she turned, her shoulders tensed. When she reached the bank transfer statements, her hands began to shake. She placed one hand on her belly as if to steady herself. That can't be true, she whispered. He said that house was only in his name. Names on paper can change, I said gently, but effort and rights don't. She looked up at me, eyes red. Are you saying he lied to me? I'm saying he lied to all of us, I replied. Vanessa lowered her head. I saw her shoulders tremble. She didn't cry out loud at first. It was the quiet kind of collapse when someone realizes the wall they've leaned on for so long was only a thin backdrop. He said Emily was dangerous, she said, her voice breaking. He said she might hurt me, that I had to stay away. I stayed silent. I'd heard enough stories like that to know that when someone wants control, they always invent a monster. So what am I? Vanessa asked, almost to herself. Just a tool? I looked at her. You're a person, I said, and you're carrying another life. That alone means you deserve the truth. Vanessa wiped her tears. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. What do you want me to do? She asked weakly. I don't want you to do anything, I said. The decision is yours. She looked at me in disbelief. You're not forcing me? I don't need to, I replied. The truth has its own way. Vanessa was quiet for a long time. I could hear the wall clock ticking. Finally, she stood up and walked to the window. City lights reflected off the glass, stretching into long streaks. Lucas says he's about to be harmed, she said, her back to me. He says someone is trying to destroy him. I only want to return what was taken, I replied. She turned back to me, her eyes different now. No longer defensive, no longer blindly trusting. Only a painful clarity remained. I'll speak, Vanessa said slowly. Not because of you, and not because of Emily, but because I don't want my child to grow up with a father like that. I nodded. That's your decision. She sat back down, picked up the stack of papers and held them tightly against her chest. I was foolish, she said, but I won't stay that way. I stood up. If you need a lawyer, I can recommend one. If not, I'll respect your choice. Vanessa looked at me, and for the first time since I arrived, she smiled, a sad but genuine smile. Thank you, she said, for not treating me like an enemy. I never saw you as an enemy, I replied. My enemy is silence. When I left, the hallway was quiet. The elevator doors closed, leaving behind an apartment where the truth had just been laid on the table. I didn't know exactly what Vanessa would do next. I only knew that from that moment on, Lucas had lost another wall. Outside, the night air was cool. I paused for a moment and took a deep breath. I didn't feel victorious. I felt a circle slowly closing. not through revenge, but through people who had been deceived beginning to see one another. On the way home, I thought of Emily. I thought of the day she would learn that even the woman who once stood on the other side had chosen to speak the truth. And I knew that when lies are exposed from within, they have nowhere left to hide. Big changes in a person's life rarely arrive with noise. They usually begin with small touches, like a pebble dropped into still water, sending ripples outward. The investigation began that way too. Daniel called me early one morning while Emily was still asleep. His voice was lower and more concise than usual. "The police have opened an official case," he said. "It's no longer just an internal review." I sat at the kitchen table, watching steam rise from my coffee. I didn't ask anything else. I knew what that meant. Once the law names something, it doesn't turn away easily. The days that followed unfolded with an unfamiliar rhythm. There were no more frantic calls from Lucas. Instead, there were emails from the law office, brief meetings with investigators, requests to confirm details. I signed papers, answered questions, provided copies of everything I had. I did it all slowly and carefully, as if reassembling an old clock, each gear needing to fit into its proper place. Vanessa went to the police station with her mother. I wasn't in the interview room, but Daniel told me about it afterward. The two women sat side by side, one young and pregnant, the other older, her hands trembling from a mix of anger and fear. Vanessa spoke first. She talked about what Lucas had told her, about how he painted Emily as a danger, about the money whose real origin she had never known. Then her mother spoke, a tired but steady voice. She said she had suspected something, had noticed signs that didn't sit right, but chose to believe Lucas's explanations because she thought her daughter was about to become a mother and needed stability. When a mother admits she was wrong, the room grows very quiet. Those statements didn't need drama. There were no floods of tears or grand words. There was only consistency, and that consistency was what gave the case its weight. Lucas reacted exactly as I had expected, and still, it saddened me. He called Daniel, called me, then called anyone who would still answer. He said he had been misunderstood, set up, betrayed. He blamed Emily, blamed Vanessa, blamed me, blamed the system. At no point did he speak about his own responsibility. One afternoon, Daniel sent me a copy of the temporary ruling. A restraining order had been issued. Lucas was not allowed to contact Emily, directly or indirectly. No messages, no calls, no going through other people. I read that line over and over. It was short, dry, pure legal language, but to me it felt like a door being locked, not to trap anyone, but to protect someone who was finally allowed some peace. I went home early that day. Emily was sitting on the sofa reading. She looked up when she saw me, searching my face. I sat down across from her without speaking right away and placed the copy of the restraining order on the table. "What is this, Dad?" Emily asked softly. "It's confirmation," I said. "From now on, Lucas is not allowed to come near you." Emily looked at the paper, then at me. She didn't cheer. She didn't cry. She just let out a long breath, as if setting down a weight she'd been carrying for too long. "So, I'm safe now, Dad?" she asked. I nodded. "At least legally." Emily leaned back against the couch. I saw her shoulders drop just slightly. That was the moment I realized that safety doesn't come from everything being over, but from knowing a clear boundary has finally been put in place. In the days that followed, Emily slept better. She began to eat more, to smile more easily. Some mornings I heard her softly humming in the kitchen while making tea. Small changes, but to me, they were worth more than any verdict. For Lucas, it was the opposite. The news spread quietly, not enough to become a scandal, but enough that the people involved knew. His work stalled, appointments were canceled. People who once laughed with him began to keep their distance. Through Daniel, I heard that Lucas had gone to the police station in a panic, trying to walk back his earlier statements, trying to clarify. But the law doesn't work that way. Once the pieces are laid on the table, no one can pretend they never existed. One evening, I sat alone in the living room with only half the lights on. I thought I would feel satisfied. I thought I would feel relief at having won. But that feeling never came. What I felt instead was a deep tiredness lifting, like a fever finally breaking after many days. I wasn't happy about Lucas's collapse. I was only sad that things had to go so far before they stopped. Daniel called me again to say the investigation would continue, that there were many steps still ahead. I thanked him. After hanging up, I sat quietly, listening to the ticking of the clock. I thought about my wife. If she were still alive, what would she say right now? Maybe she would just smile, place her hand over mine and say, "At least the child is home." That night, Emily knocked on my door. She stood there holding a cup of tea. "Dad," she said, "I don't know how to say this enough." "You don't have to say anything," I replied. Emily set the cup down and hugged me. A slow hug, unhurried. I could feel her heartbeat, still a little shaky but steady. I placed my hand on her back and said nothing. There are moments when silence is the fullest language. When Emily went back to her room, I turned off some of the lights. I didn't wish for Lucas to be punished more harshly. I only wished that Emily could go on living without having to look over her shoulder. The collapse had happened. No fists, no shouting, just the truth placed where it belonged, and time doing the rest. The call came on a quiet evening while I was sitting at the kitchen table, organizing the papers Daniel had sent earlier that afternoon. Emily had gone to bed early. She had started keeping a new routine. Lights off before 10 p.m., phone left outside the room, giving her body and mind a chance to rest. I valued that, the way I valued every small sign that she was slowly taking control of her life again. The phone vibrated. A name appeared that I didn't need to look at closely to know who it was. Lucas. I didn't answer right away. I let it ring a few more times, not as punishment, but to ask myself what state of mind I should listen in. Finally, I accepted the call, set the phone on the table, and put it on speaker. I didn't want to hold it too close. "Michael." Lucas's voice came through, hoarse and tired. No sharp edge, no arrogance. "Thank you for answering." I didn't respond. I let him continue. I don't know where to start," he said. "Everything is falling apart. Work, friends. Vanessa won't talk to me anymore." I looked at the surface of the wooden table, worn with old scratches. I had sat there hundreds of times, but this was the first time I had heard Lucas speak like this. "I was wrong," he went on, faster now, as if afraid I might hang up. "I admit everything. Selling the house, hiding the money, lying. I was selfish." I took a slow breath. I wasn't surprised. Confessions that come late often smell of desperation, not awakening. Still, I listened. Not for him, but to be sure I wasn't carrying any unprocessed anger. "I'm sorry," Lucas said. "I'm sorry to Emily, and I'm sorry to you." He paused, waiting for a response. I didn't answer right away. I could hear his heavy breathing on the other end, the sound of someone trying to grab hold of something slipping away. "Can you say something?" Lucas asked, almost pleading. "Can you forgive me?" I closed my eyes for a moment, not to avoid but to choose my words. Some answers shouldn't be rushed, especially when they can shape the rest of a story. "Lucas," I said calmly, "I don't have that right." He went silent. I continued. "You're apologizing to the wrong person," I said. "The person you need to speak to isn't me." "But you're her father," Lucas argued weakly. "You can help me talk to Emily. You can put in a good word for me." I shook my head, even though he couldn't see it. "No," I said. I won't do that." "Michael, please," Lucas said, his voice breaking. "I know I don't deserve it, but I can't handle things ending like this." "They're not ending because of me," I replied. "They're ending because of your choices." A long silence followed. I heard something like a hand tapping lightly on a table on his end. "I'm losing everything," Lucas said, his voice trembling. "I just need one chance." "I'm not the one who gives chances," I said, "and I'm not the one who judges." "Then what am I to you?" Lucas asked. "A monster?" "I see you as someone responsible for his actions," I said. "Nothing more, nothing less." He sighed. "I don't expect you to understand," he said. "I just hope you'll go easy on me." I straightened my back. "I've never been hard on you," I said. "I've only put the truth where it belongs." Lucas was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was different, no longer urgent, no longer begging. "Is Emily okay?" he asked. That question, late as it was, made me pause. I considered whether to answer. "Emily is recovering," I said, "and that no longer has anything to do with you." "Did you tell her I apologized?" Lucas asked. "No," I said, "and I won't." "Why?" he asked, almost whispering. "Because an apology only matters when it reaches the right person at the right time," I said. "Emily doesn't need to hear it to keep living. She needs peace." He didn't say anything else. I thought the call would end there. But then Lucas spoke very softly. If one day Emily wants to talk to me, you won't stop her, will you?" I opened my eyes and looked into the darkness outside the window. "I won't stop anything Emily chooses for herself," I said, "but I won't push her either." "So, it's up to her," Lucas said. "It always is," I replied. The call ended without a goodbye. Just a sigh, then the line went dead. I sat there for a long while, the phone still on the table. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel pity. Only a complete stillness, like a piece of music ending on exactly the right final note. I stood up and went to check on Emily's room. She was sleeping soundly, the nightlight casting a soft glow on a face that looked less hollow now. I pulled the blanket up a little higher, very gently. In that moment, I knew I had done the right thing. Forgiveness is not a bridge that lets the one who caused harm walk back into the victim's life. It is a door, and only the person who was hurt holds the key. The next morning, I told Emily about the call. Not in detail, not dramatically, just the truth, set gently on the table so she could decide whether she wanted to touch it or not. Emily listened without speaking at first. She stirred her tea, eyes lowered. After a while, she looked up, her expression strangely calm. "I'm not angry anymore," she said, "but I don't want to talk." I nodded. "I understand." "Maybe one day," Emily added, "but not now." "Whenever you want," I said, "and if you never want to, that's okay too." Emily smiled, a small but real smile. "Thank you, Dad," she said, "for not deciding for me." I sat there looking at my daughter and felt a circle close. Not a circle of revenge or victory, but a circle of responsibility returning to where it belonged. Lucas had said he was sorry, but that apology was no longer a key to open any door except his own. And to me, that was the most proper order life could offer. Emily began therapy on a quiet Monday morning. I drove her to the clinic, a small beige building set behind a row of maple trees that had almost completely shed their leaves. No big signs, no sharp smell of disinfectant, just a place calm enough for people to sit down and say the things that had been stuck in their throats for too long. I didn't go in with her. I sat in the car, engine off, watching leaves spin lightly in the wind. When Emily walked inside, she turned back and gave me a small nod. Just a nod, but I understood. "Wait for me, Dad." The sessions didn't make everything bright overnight. There were no miracles, but I noticed small changes that only someone close enough would see. Emily began sleeping more deeply. She stopped waking in the night in a panic. Some mornings I heard the kettle clicking on in the kitchen and the familiar scent of chamomile tea spreading. New routines, as gentle as the way she was learning to care for herself again. Some days, Emily sat by the window, writing a few lines in a small notebook. I didn't ask. I learned to respect her silences. At night, Emily slept peacefully under this roof. An old roof, not spacious but warm enough. I pulled the blanket up, turned off the light, and closed the door. I lingered for a moment, listening to her steady breathing on the other side. There are simple things we take for granted until we almost lose them. I was almost 70. I thought I had passed through enough roles in life: husband, worker, citizen. But it turned out the role of a father never ends. It only changes shape with the years, asking for more patience, more clarity, and a quieter kind of courage. Some evenings, I sat alone in the living room, watching the wall clock move slowly. I thought about the years gone by, about calls that went unanswered, reassurances I had believed, instincts I had pushed aside because I thought leaving things alone would make them fine. I learned a painful but necessary truth. Silence is not always protection. Sometimes silence is the coat that covers abuse, financial, emotional, so it can keep growing in the dark. I'm not proud that I had to step into a confrontation. I only know I chose not to use violence, not to seek revenge. Justice doesn't need fists. It needs light, evidence, and persistence. I learned to set boundaries, with the one who caused harm and with myself. Kindness doesn't mean excusing everything. Kindness needs limits, so it doesn't become permission for someone else to exploit it. Emily slowly found her laughter again. Not loud laughter, but a fragile, genuine smile. She told me that some days old memories return and tighten her chest. But now she knows she isn't alone. She knows she has the right to say no, the right to stop, the right to ask for help. I looked at her and realized that while I thought I was saving my child, she was also saving me, pulling me out of the fog of old age, reminding me that clarity is also a form of courage. I share this story not to boast of a victory. I share it to mark a journey, from silence to speaking up, from fear to boundaries, from harm to recovery. The story in this video is a fictional story inspired by real-life situations and human experiences, created to offer moral value, life lessons, and emotional impact for viewers. It does not encourage imitation of the actions shown, does not incite harm, and does not target any individual or organization. I believe that family bonds need a voice when there are signs of injustice. Kindness needs limits, so it doesn't become complicity. And justice begins with clarity, with gathering the truth, choosing lawful paths, and placing the safety of the vulnerable first. If you're somewhere out there reading this and it feels familiar, remember that you are not weak for needing help. Weakness is knowing something is wrong and still convincing yourself to stay silent. Strength is sometimes just a call, a conversation, a small step toward the light. As for me, I keep living slowly. I make tea every morning. I drive Emily to therapy when she needs it. I fix the old fence in the yard. Those small things fit together into a life that feels whole in the simplest way. I saved my child, and in the process, I saved myself from the regret of being too late. If you stayed with me to the very end, I'm truly grateful. Where are you watching from? What city or country? If you were in this situation, what would you do? Please share your thoughts in the comments. I read every line with appreciation. If this story touched you, please like and subscribe to follow along with the next stories. Thank you for listening, and I wish you a peaceful night and a tomorrow brave enough to speak up.